Oh. All right. Today we are working with vegetables. A lot of various types of vegetables, high in nutrition, dietary fiber, minerals, really good for us. Our bodies truly are dependent on minerals, and that's going to be a big takeaway from today's session. So there's going to be 3 dishes we're making. One is going to be a marinated and grilled portobello mushroom. The other one is going to be a mushroom and leek tart. And we're going to do a classic French ratatouille that is typically served cold, but often served warm, and has been recognized as a French picnic salad that I don't see very often in the grocery stores when they had ready-to-eat stuff. Well, I'm going to start with the mushroom leek tart, and with that you have a measure of oil on your trays, the preheated skillet to about a medium degree of temperature. And I'm going to free pour the oil for this application. It's about 1.5 tablespoons of oil. Allow that oil to get hot to the point where it's kind of ripples in the oil, moving that oil around the skillet, and starting with the domestic cremini mushrooms, which have a little bit of a beige tint to them. Adding those to the skillet and allowing that mushroom to start to pick up some sound. If we're starting to cook those mushrooms and we don't hear that sound, the skillet's not hot enough. It's a key indicator on whether or not we have the right application of heat with those particular mushrooms. At this point, when it's in the start process, I'm going to mill in some salt and pepper, either ground pepper that you may have at your home, or milled pepper mill would be even better, just because I think the flavor's brighter and you might have a better experience from that taste. So as those mushrooms start to evaporate, move them around a little bit, let that peppercorn do its job. I'm going to add in the shiitake mushroom, an Asian variety mushroom, sliced nice and thin. Both mushrooms have been pre-washed for your convenience. And let those mushrooms start to sweat. And another skillet, I'm going to start on the ratatouille. And for the ratatouille, we're going to start with olive oil, an extra virgin olive oil. And allow that to shimmer. Heat just enough to be able to bring a shimmer to the dish, to the skillet. And I'm going to start with the diced onion that you have. And allow those to start to sweat, become a little translucent. We don't want to caramelize them, just get a nice sweat on them. And let those cook. And you'll see those start to bounce around in the skillet. And you get a nice aromatic nose on those. Right behind that, we're going to put in some chopped garlic. And let that garlic just briefly sweat so you get a good nose on that. Following right behind that with some mixed bell pepper. Yellow and green bell are going into the skillet. We'll come back and move these mushrooms around a little bit to make sure they are all caramelizing, getting a nice cast of golden color on them. And as we cook the mushrooms and these vegetables, we're allowing that steam vapor to escape. It's going to start the caramelization process of natural sugars that are in that vegetable. As those mushrooms start to break down, we're going to put in the garlic on this particular measure. It's about 1 tablespoon, 2 teaspoons, close to 1 tablespoon of garlic. And right behind the garlic, so it doesn't overcook and doesn't have a scent of burn, we're going to add the leeks. Leeks are a nice root allium or of the onion family. Need to be thoroughly cleaned and taken off the green top and splitting the white root and allowing water to run clearly through all those layers of that leek. A little bit misunderstood vegetable, I don't see too often. I buy them a lot personally because I like the way that they taste and I like the way they cook. So as the onion and the bell pepper start to break down and we're extracting some of that water that's in that vegetable, we're going to add the green zucchini. But everything's a nice medium dice for the intent and purpose of allowing things to cook in a similar manner, as well as have a visual at the end of the cooking process. So it's much more attractive when our cuts are consistent. So we're going to allow those to hit the surface of the skillet so that they all cook nice and evenly. What's left behind is eggplant. We simply took the Black Beauty eggplant, top and bottom trim off, and then we peeled the eggplant and allowed that to be tossed in some acidified water, some lemon water, so that the oxidation process on these eggplant don't get dark. And that's what is required. So in your home meal kit, you're going to have these eggplant that are in a bit of water. So do your best to squeeze that water out of there. Two applications of value is that it takes some of the bitterness out of the eggplant, as well as keeps it from oxidizing and turning brown. If you buy a fresh eggplant in the grocery store and you start cutting it, it turns brown very, very quickly, just like a potato would. So we have to capture that process and slow it down. And acid is a very good ingredient to use to make that happen. If you don't have lemon juice, a vinegar will work out fine. Anything that's an acid in the food world will be sufficient. As these zucchini start to cook and they start to get softened up a little, some of the natural water in them starts to evaporate, we're going to go in behind it with the eggplant, allowing that to cook. And the eggplant will take a little bit more time to cook and evaporate those natural waters from there because of the amount of water that's in them. You have a measure of dried oregano that's going to be sprinkled on top of the eggplant and allow that to penetrate into that mixture. What's left behind for that dish is some diced tomatoes, which are concassate tomatoes, some sweet basil, and a little bit of parsley. I'm going to divide that parsley into a couple different places so I can use it more than once. For the mushroom leek tart, now that we've got the leeks in a stage where they're soft and tender, we're going to add white wine and allow that white wine to reduce in with this mushroom and leek mixture with the garlic. It's already seasoned with the peppercorns, a little salt. We're going to allow that to reduce down to what we refer to in the French cuisine as an eau sec. So it's kind of dry, almost dry. At that point, we're going to take the leaves off of these thyme branches and allow those leaves to infuse in the liquid of that white wine as it starts to reduce. And as it sits in this mixture, it's going to infuse into that dish as it cooks down. We're going to behind it with some dried basil. And you can smell the kind of licorice flavor of that basil as soon as you put it in there, because it's relatively fresh basil that was dehydrated, and then we chopped it and put it into these containers so we can use a fresh, like dry vegetable for our applications here. So as that reduces down to where it's pretty much dry is when we're going to add heavy cream to this mixture. And we're going to allow that heavy cream to reduce down so that it's a bit thicker. And a nice kind of a creamy texture to it. Eggplant is starting to break down. Some of its waters are extracting, working out quite fine. If at this point you're going to work your mushrooms on a grill, this is a good time to have the grill fired up to be able to cook those, to get those mushrooms cooked so it's preheated. I'm going to let this ratatouille slow down in the cooking process a bit, and I'm going to move on to rolling out the dough for the mushroom tart. So you're going to have a measure of flour that you'll put on your poured surface, and you're going to have your dough, which is already a pre-made yeast risen dough. It's going to be there to work with, and basically we're just going to work with it. If you have a roller at home, a rolling pin, here in our instructional kitchen, when you come back in for live classes, you'll have this nice, very convenient handheld rolling pin to work with. So I'm going to work that dough by hand a bit to try and stretch it out. Because it's a high gluten flour, it's going to have some pullback when we stretch it. So I try to cut the chase a bit by stretching that that dough. Moving around both sides to be able to have a good stretch of that. Using this rolling pin you have at home or this handheld, you're going to start working the dough. It can be an artisan shape. It doesn't have to be a specific round like we typically think of when we think tart. It's basically just a French term for a pie per se. So I'm going to try and work it from the middle to the outside, and my ultimate goal is to have the edges a little bit thinner because we're going to double them up as we create an edge for this tart to encase all of this mushroom and leek mixture for the development of the tart. So it looks pretty good just from rolling it. You can do this easily with a rolling pin. If you don't have a rolling pin at home, and if you have a bottle per se, I don't know if you'd have a wine bottle at this stage in life, but you would have a bottle that would serve the purpose as a something around that'll roll that you can use that's going to be dense enough to work with. I'm trying to think of what bottle we might have in our refrigerators that would work. Sure, you can come up with something, but I think most people that cook will have a rolling pin in their area. So now I've got this beautiful pastry dough, and I'm going to simply just start by doing a twist, kind of a pull and turn. Kind of let that dough make a crevice or like a ring around there. It's kind of like a levee or a dam built around there, and just kind of pull and twist as you progressively move through that entire circumference of that dough to be able to make this rim, kind of like an artisan pizza you would see at a place like a Mellow Mushroom or a Chicago-style deep dish. You would have that rim to it because the way it's being cooked in that cast iron vessel. So from that point, you've got that dough fairly well manufactured, a nice rim around the edge. Your mushroom mixture is cooking down to where it's very smooth and has a nice consistency to it. It's still a little bit wet. I want to cook it down a little bit further. So you have a measure of oil on your trays, and you're going to use that oil just to spread around on this tray to be able to allow that flatbread dough, that tart dough, from sticking. And you also have a measure of cornmeal that we're going to use to be able to help release that dough from this cooking surface. Carefully transfer that tart shell to that prepared surface and allow that to cook, reduce down a bit more. While that's cooking, I'm going to go over to the bar blender and make a vinaigrette that we're going to marinate our mushrooms with. And so for that, we have a bar blender that's typical that we would use for various applications at home. And for that, I'm going to start with mustard that we have on our trays and honey. Those two ingredients are emulsifiers that are going to allow this vinaigrette to be, or this marinade per se, to be thickened naturally. And you don't have to have a blender. You can certainly do this by hand with a whisk. But you want to make sure that if you're doing this by hand with a whisk in a bowl, that you are putting everything in the bowl with the exception of the oil first. Oil is always going to go last, and it's always going to be beaten very vigorously, almost like your life depended upon it in that process. So this is going to be a little bit noisy, so I'll stop talking for a moment to be able to incorporate the honey, the mustard, and the balsamic vinegar together. Once I've achieved that combination of those, been homogenized, I'm going to take the cap filler off, and I'm going to slowly pour in the oil, all right? You want to do that slowly so that it starts to emulsify and becomes a homogenized state. Because it's got a lot of pressure, it might spit out all over your fancy clothes, so I'm going to put a little bit of cover over it as I slowly add in the oil. After the oil's in, you can replace the cap filler and let that run for a moment. And what you have is you have portobello mushrooms that are on your tray that we took the gills out. Those looks like spines or matter on the inside, because it kind of excretes a kind of a dark liquid when it's finished. So with that vinaigrette that we've made, it's nice and smooth. Looks pretty good. I'm going to season that with some salt and pepper so that it has a nice flavor to it. Picking up some of the nuances of the balsamic vinegar and the honey and the oil. More so on the pepper than on the salt, I think is a good process for that. Spin that around. I'm going to pour that marinade vinaigrette right on those mushrooms. And if you could manage your time in your home kitchen to allow these to marinate sooner, maybe 30 minutes or so. Sometimes at home I'll let these marinate sometimes overnight, based on how thick that mushroom is, will determine whether or not I do that process far enough out in advance. So I think that's something to think about. The longer they marinate, the better the outcome of those mushrooms in the grill process are going to be. So I've allowed this mushroom mixture to cool down to the point where it's very smooth. And what I have left behind is some Parmesan cheese, which I'm going to use the large majority, about 2/3 of it in this sauce, and leave 1/3 of it back behind for the finishing process, and allowing that Parmesan cheese to be able to work in with that creamy mushroom and leek mixture. And in a perfect world, we allow this to cool down a little bit before we put it in the tart shell, but it'll work either way. I just think it's going to be less effective, have a less negative effect on the dough if it has a chance to cool down just briefly before we use it. So using a spoon or some other instrument that you may have at your house to place that mushroom mixture in that tart shell and just work it to the edges in a nice consistent manner. You'll want that dough in the center to cook, so having a pile of this mixture in the middle of the dough is probably not going to work out real well. Have it evenly distributed. After that, you're going to put on some slices of fresh mozzarella cheese. Your cheese may or may not be cut. If it is, it's packed in water. Let that water drain off those slices of fresh mozzarella before it goes into the oven. Just evenly distribute those on that tart and finish it off with the remainder of the Parmesan cheese that you have, and allow that to make and develop a nice layer of flavor over the top of that. Our next step is going to be, you have some chopped parsley for ratatouille. We're going to steal a little bit of that and put it on top of the tart to give it a little bit of character. A little more pepper grilled on top of that. I'm going to drop that in the oven and allow that to cook. If I'm at a home oven, I'm going to cook that at about 400 degrees for about 12 minutes or so and let that cook. Meanwhile, I come back to the ratatouille. Turn the heat up a little bit so I can continue to allow those natural waters that are in that vegetable to evaporate as it gets cooked. Now again, if I had the time at home, I would have these marinated mushrooms cooked a little bit longer, or not cooked, but marinated a little bit longer. So the longer that they're marinating, the better opportunity you have of having the acid from the vinegar break down some of the cells and the molecules in those cells of that mushroom to make it a little bit soft before it even goes on the grill. And you've got a much better advantage. But I like to have the mushroom go on the grill with the cap side down and the interior up. So as it's cooking, I'm allowing that vinaigrette, that marinade, to kind of cook and kind of simmer on that mushroom. So I'm going to put them on a hot grill and let them do their job. I got a little extra marinade, pour it right on there, and I'll tell you, if you were up here, you would smell that, and I'll tell you, it smells pretty darn good. if I say so myself. So, for wrapping up that ratatouille, I got a nice sound of cooking going on there. A little bit of salt, flavor that. I don't like to put the salt in there too early in the cooking process because it forces the water out of the vegetables prematurely. I like to have it come out of the vegetables naturally. So a little milled salt, little pepper going into the dish. Concassé tomatoes are peeled and seeded tomatoes that we've done for you in advance. So now I have that dish in pretty good shape. Wow, pretty good shape to work with from that point. Reduce the heat fairly dramatically so that I have a low temperature heat, and I'm going to put in the chopped tomato. And allow that tomato, because it's already blanched and seeded and diced nice and small, it doesn't require a lot of cooking time. And that's really the end step of that ratatouille dish. It looks lovely. This is what we refer to as a stewed vegetable dish. And it can develop a lot of various flavors that you're going to enjoy. Sweet basil you have on the stem or off the stem, just simply tear it into small pieces and add that very close to the end of the cooking process so that it doesn't discolor and you get the bright flavor of that sweet basil. And then allowing that to just simply fold into the ratatouille. And it'll be like little ribbons of green, luscious flavor that just says, oh my gosh, that smells so good. It looks so nice. I love ratatouille. Do I make it very often? In the summer I do. There used to have, before COVID, we have this Saturday night picnic at the Pops thing. We would have various genres of music played by the Columbus Symphony Orchestra with usually a member of the has-been band to be able to entertain us. And I'll tell you what, that ratatouille worked out just right for that type of an event. I'm going to use some of the parsley, the majority of what I have left, to give that flavor toward the end. I'm going to allow that to just rest briefly as we take a look at that mushroom tart. Again, I'm taking about some elapsed time. Let's say maybe if I was in a home oven, I maybe had about 20 minutes or so of time elapsed before I took that mushroom tart out of the oven. What I'm going to look for is a nice golden color of that crust around the outside of that mushroom tart in the center where the fresh mozzarella and the parmesan is, to get a nice bubbly golden color so that I know that the center of that dough is going to be cooked and provide us with a nice finish and a delicious crust. It looks very much like an artisan style pizza would look. So coming out of the oven has this delightful look to it, certainly plenty for a family of two. And allow that to cool down a little bit so you can manage the process from there. So you can cut it into quarters, you can do New York style and cut it into wedges. It really depends on what your personal preference is to be able to get it to work out well. I'm going to cut this into 6 because I would feel a little guilty eating a full quarter, although I certainly could. I think that's obvious just from the physique. But I'll tell you, it's good. Makes you want to go back for a second slice, and that's something you have to ask yourself. Should I or shouldn't I? You know, simply plate that. You have either a square plate, round plate, whatever works for you, to be able to just simply present that for you and your people. Slide off of there nicely. Beautiful mushroom leek tart. It, to me, is a delish item on the menu today. The next item I'm going to work with is I'm going to flip over those mushrooms on the grill and take a look at them on the other side. Sometimes a oiled grill will work out a little easier on lifting those. So I'm just going to release them. And that mushroom has got that marinade that's kind of floated on top. And as I flip it over, I'm going to use some of that marinade to baste the opposite side. So it doesn't take long to get that nice, beautiful color on it. Once I turn them over, I'm going to reduce the heat on that grill so that I can manage the finishing of that particular dish. For the ratatouille, I'm going to finish that dish with a little bit of olive oil, just because the flavor of a very good, high quality extra virgin olive oil is going to be a sensational taste that I think you're going to enjoy. So sometimes they'll just put it into a bowl, which is how I take it to the picnics. Or you can, if you're going to do something attractive at home, you want to send some photos to your friends on Snapchat or Facebook and make them wish they won the lottery too. You can dull it up a little bit just by taking a bouillon cup or this little dish to kind of mold it, press it down, and to be able to release that so you have a very nice visual look on that dish. If I had saved a little parsley, I would have dropped a little bit of that on top. But otherwise, I'm going to take an extra virgin olive oil, put a little bit around the plate, clean towel to wipe up any type of drip, and there I have my ratatouille. If I saved a couple of basil leaves, those would look lovely on top of that as well. To finish this up, we're going to present that portobello mushroom. So for that, I'm going to take the mushroom, one mushroom, let's say for example, put that dead center of the plate there. And then we provided you some nice leafy greens of baby lettuces. I'm just going to take those and put them into that dish along with some of the vinaigrette that we held behind. So when I made the vinaigrette, I used the large majority of it on marination of the mushrooms, and a little bit I'm going to use for the lettuce greens to be able to give them some flavor. And toss them around so that they are evenly coated. And you have a little bit of diced tomato. I'm going to put a few of those tomatoes in with those mushrooms. The longer you toss them in that vinaigrette, the more they're going to break down. And they're nice, hearty baby lettuce greens that work out beautifully for this type of a dish. It's really could be a meal in its own. Just a light measure of salt and some milled pepper. We already seasoned the vinaigrette, so we don't have to do a lot of additional flavoring agents to that dish. Kind of organize a few of those lettuces in some type of a discipline, and then accent garnish that with a few tomatoes around the outside to be able to give it a little bit of a additional look of love. And then I'm a fan of pepper, so I'm going to put a little pepper on the top of that to make that dish, and just a little more olive oil because I love the flavor of it, and it's just delicious. So if you're going to use some of those items, just reserve a few of them. And that's our Cooking with Vegetables event for this evening. A nice, wonderful mushroom leek tart, ratatouille, and a grilled portobello mushroom. Enjoy.